From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and Joelle, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How today, Joelle?
Well, I'm a little bit sad because I saw on the news this morning that Tina Turner has passed.
That was a bit sad. 83?
Yeah, but due to a long illness, apparently. So
yeah, it wasn't very public, so I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard about that either. But yeah, not somebody who's, I don't think I ever owned any of her music, but she just was always there. Yeah. Sort of through childhood. And
you're a bit of a singer back in the day. Did you ever belt out any Tina Turner tunes?
Think so. I would sing along, but not never with a band or in karaoke or anything. She and I don't share quite the same vocal range.
Yeah, okay.
I go okay, but I'm no Tina Turner.
Yeah, and I can't imagine you like being as active as she is on stage. Yeah.
Dancing and singing, man. That's being able to hold a tune while you're dancing. That's tough.
What would you sing back in the day? Because you were in a band.
I was in a blues band.
Okay.
Yeah. Just whatever I liked, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, blues band, but you like grunge back in the day.
Indie. Yeah. Indie rock grunge, yeah. It's more about finding a song that works for your voice as well, rather than what music you especially enjoy listening to, because sometimes the songs that you like aren't the songs that you can sing well.
Yeah, that's very cool. In my case, it's like every song.
Well,
yeah, I can't
You
sing.
know, that in that case, you just can sing for the fun of it.
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter what you sound like.
Unless my daughters are in the car and then I get, Dad, stop.
Yeah, that happens to me as well. So that's irrespective of whether you're a good singer or not. Your kids just don't want to hear you sing.
Yeah, it's not nice.
No, this I think the first time that happened to me, Ronan was maybe 5, and he was like, "Mum, are you singing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you stop?"
Wow.
Yeah, he's definitely my son.
Yeah, not nice. All right. Well, condolences to Tina Turner and Turner's family.
Well, not condolences to her, but
to her family.
To her family.
Her family.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that somber note,
we
should probably bring our guest in. That's probably the worst lead in to a guest we've had.
It might be. Yeah. That's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Okay, so this person's got a bit of work to do. Her PhD research explored the impacts of precarious employment on young people. She then went on to work within the business school at Massey University and was a member of the Healthy Work Group. She now applies her research expertise in the public sector of New Zealand. A warm welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kate Bone.
Ahi Marie Korua, or in your case, Morena Korua, which is good morning. And thank you so much for having me today. I thought that a perfect segue to the Tina Turner somberness was you could have said, "And here's Kate, she's simply the best."
Better than all the rest.
Do you know, I just broke the news to our design team, and none of them obviously had seen the news yet. And Brendan said, "Oh, she was simply the best." And I said, "Boo, Brendan, boo to that joke." And then Luke said, "Who's Tina Turner?" I think he said it in jest, but it is sort of classic Luke.
Yeah.
Blissfully unaware of anything earlier than about 1998.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. The 90s didn't exist.
Chuckle about your comment about singing in the car as well, or the kids' kind of brutalness of singing talents, because when I was at primary school, we had a singing class, and I think I was probably only about 7, and they made us sing that Tina Turner song, it's River Deep, Mountain High. And that is the hardest song to sing. And this group of 37-year-olds, and we sang it perfectly, it was a stop start. I can't remember who the music teacher was, but I just remember thinking, this seems really intense. But it was really good fun, of course.
That's a very intense song to have a Not even just one, but a whole group of kids learning to sing.
Yeah, we'll have to do the Nutbush, I think, today in the office.
See, I don't actually know the moves. I just kind of stomp my feet and kick occasionally.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. So you can sing, but you can't like coordinate yourself for dancing.
No, I just don't know the dance moves. I never learned them.
We'll go on YouTube.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it.
Yeah, we'll teach.
You guys
Luke.
can teach. Yes, we'll definitely teach Luke. Yes.
Yeah, cultural experience for him.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Kate, before we get on to the serious stuff, what podcast do you like to listen to?
Oh, well, I love a bit of Brené Brown, which I think most people do. Her podcast is, just great. It's one that I can listen to the episodes more than once as well, and I always get something different because I really enjoy her guests too. Another kind of, I guess, academic one that I like is the American Psychological Association podcast, and they have different scholars come on and talk about certain theories and things, and I really enjoy that one. It's very kind of digestible but interesting. And then something, I guess, a bit more kind of pop culture related would be I really like Eyes on Gilead, which is the podcast where the hosts discuss The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood and the TV series and kind of analyse in great depth each episode and discuss the characters and sometimes interview the characters too. So that's one I really, really enjoy as well.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't watched the series. I read the book and then I read the sequel that was released recently as well. But the series, I think, I don't know, man, life's already too grim. I don't need to watch that for entertainment as well.
And it's all based on true things, which is the most interesting part of that series is you watch it and you think, oh, that's so out there, and imagine if that happened. And then that's what Margaret Atwood says is nothing in her books or, in that series is actually not based on some version of reality and what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's the scary part.
Yeah. No. Well, that's part of why I don't want to watch it because it just bums me out. Yeah. Can you tell us about your professional career, please?
Sure. So I think in terms of how I got to where I got to today, a bit of a turning point for me would have been when I was doing my master's at Uni of Auckland, and I looked at spiritual retreat tourism. So I was really interested in yoga, and I did my yoga teacher training at the same time as doing my master's. And I really wanted to go to retreat sites and work out why people went there and what they kind of got from going to a spiritual retreat site and, why they spent their free time there and paid for it and all the rest of it. And something that really stuck out for me was that most of the people there, and this was my research topic, so I was interviewing people, and most of them were there because they were so stressed out or overwhelmed by their everyday life. So, that was really interesting for me. And I collected my data on a weekend where they had a working bee, like a woofing, willing workers on organic farms. So that then encouraged me to go traveling for a year in Europe. And when I got back, I decided to move over to Australia because my mum was over there. And I applied for jobs and I applied for PhD scholarships. And I got a PhD scholarship. And I decided to research workplace health and wellbeing. Because, thinking about that spiritual retreat tourism and thinking, people shouldn't have to go away and pay for a weekend away to recover from the stresses of their work. I did my PhD at Monash Uni in Melbourne. While I was doing that, I was doing some research assisting and some teaching. And then after that, I was also teaching yoga. After that, a job came up within the Healthy Work Group at Massey University in Auckland, which is my hometown, and my academic mentor was there as well. So I hopped over, came back to Aotearoa, and I worked at Massey within the Healthy Work Group as a researcher and lecturer for around about 4 years, and was involved in some pretty big teaching courses in different subject areas, teamwork and leadership, HRM, equity and diversity in the workplace, really brought my background in sociology to the business school, and also was on a really big project funded by WorkSafe and the Health Research Council, which was about how to deliver interventions in small to medium-sized businesses that can improve the health and well-being of employees across sector. And I was pretty hooked actually as part of that research, because we were in contact with these organisations over a long period of time. And then when I saw a role come up within the public sector, I thought, I'm going to go and work in a large organisation and, not just being the researcher coming in and then leaving again, because that is often what happens. And sometimes you don't get any follow-up because your key contact might move on, or, you've got another project to get on with. So I thought, I want to be in there and see what actually happens and be part of the change. So that's what facilitated my move across. And also it was because of, COVID hit and the academic career really changed. Everything went online. All of the kind of academic communities were drastically impacted. Like there was, massive lack of networking, conferences, all those good things that actually spur you on, give you that mojo to keep going with research, which can sometimes be quite challenging, as well as teaching to blank screens sometimes for hours at a time to students in New Zealand or China. And I just wanted that people contact again. So yeah, I've been working in the public sector now for about 18 months. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, so you're currently working as a health and wellbeing researcher within the New Zealand public sector. So this latest role that you're doing, what does it involve?
So basically, within the public sector, we often have very diverse employees taking on many different roles, and there can be a lack of data in terms of what health and wellbeing challenges are facing this workforce. And they're obviously a very important workforce because they're also serving our communities. So my role is actually to collect data to start to understand some of the health and wellbeing challenges that are facing our people, and then how best we can support them. So I take a very collaborative approach to my research. So it's not about someone kind of coming in and saying, this is what you need to do. It's really got to be about engaging with people. So I've been involved in lots of focus groups, interviews, things like that, where we're actually talking to people and finding out, what do you need? What are the stresses? What are the things that make you feel like you can thrive? And how can we build upon that? So yeah, I would say my role has been to be a bit of a communication bridge between our people and senior leadership, and to really advocate for evidence-based changes in that space.
Yeah, so what are some of the ways that you're collecting that data then, Kate?
I prefer a qualitative method, so I'm primarily a qualitative researcher. So I like talking to people. So focus groups, interviews, they're my favourite kind of methods. It's great to have some surveys occasionally, but I always find that people really like to talk about their work. There's never any kind of hesitation when you ask someone, hey, can you spare 30 minutes or an hour or 90 minutes to talk about your employment and, what you enjoy about that and where it could be improved. So I'm a talk to the people kind of person.
Yeah, that's same as you, Joelle, right? Wasn't that your honours and masters?
Yeah, both of them. I did, qualitative research. Yep.
Yeah, which is why you stick away from the quantitative stuff these days.
Correct. I did grounded theory as well, which is like,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay.
People who know will know.
Yeah. No, that's great. And it's, qualitative methods obviously give you such rich data, right, that you can't get from the quantitative stuff. So quantitative is great when you're trying to get a picture at scale. But if you're trying to really understand, work is done, then there's no better way than to actually talk to the people who are doing the job.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and particularly with, it can also be more culturally appropriate. So within the context of Aotearoa, we're a bicultural country, and it's quite well known that Māori and Pacifica peoples generally prefer to talk face-to-face. We have a saying, it's kanohi ki te kanohi, which means literally face-to-face. And that's a preferred way of communicating. And it makes people feel often more comfortable because you form that connection. And that connection can help to establish trust and a more genuine kind of connection. So yeah, it works really well within the context of Aotearoa, but I think it works anywhere as well, because then people know kind of who you are as well. And that's very important when you're talking to people about their work, because it's obviously quite risky for people to actually talk to you about their work, because that is their livelihood. And you have to be really careful that people feel comfortable with what they've shared and safe and able to know that their data will be treated with respect and will be used appropriately. So I think that kind of face-to-face is very important. But yeah, there are also fantastic quantitative research projects underway as well. But just personally, I really enjoy talking to people and getting that diverse range of perspectives.
So how does your role currently then compare to working in academia?
That's a really good question. In academia, I found that because the academic role is quite unique in that you are critic and conscience of society. So that's part of what you're signing up for when you sign on to an academic position. And with that, you're expected to be kind of objective and neutral in the things that you talk about. So there's that sense of academic freedom and autonomy, and it's okay to be critical, and it's okay to share certain ideas that, you know, might even be quite exploratory. And you have those robust conversations and that robust kind of peer review process all the time, whether it's through, you know, just talking to your colleagues in the corridor or attending conferences or publishing. I find it quite exploratory and quite open-minded in terms of what you might be able to talk about and present. And you're also part of the academic community, which I really enjoy. So it doesn't matter really where I've worked. I've always found that I'm part of something bigger when I'm in academia, because, you know, you've always got a journal that you could submit to, or a conference you could attend, and then you're with your kind of people, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. So yeah, I find that there's that ability to own your ideas, have that freedom, and to really be critic and conscious of society, which is quite liberating. And being around peers who are also kind of in that frame of mind and understanding of those concepts. And, you know, you have a good, robust conversation. Sometimes it gets a bit heated, or, you know, you can have a disagreement, but I really like that. So I would say that's kind of the academic side. Yeah. And then working in public sector is just slightly different, because you are seen as part of that organization, and, you know, there's different kind of rules and expectations around what you do or what you might say, or you're kind of seen more as a representative of an organization or as of the sector itself. So I think there's a little bit more of a fear in public sector in terms of research, because there's a reputation to uphold as well. Both receive obviously funding through public taxpayer money, but there's a slight different orientation there. And so I really enjoy researching in public sector, because you've got great access to participants. You've got a very diverse range of employees, which is much more diverse than within academia. And you have some great opportunities to actually embed the research knowledge or data or findings that you have into an organisation, and to kind of see things through when that's enabled. And I think that last comment is pretty key here, that that's not always possible, and that could be one of the challenges within public sector.
So do you find, I guess, when you're researching as someone who's also an employee of that organisation, I guess the guarantees of things like confidentiality and that sort of thing aren't necessarily as clear as they would be if you're coming in as a third party sort of from academia, where you've got an ethics board approved project and all of those sort of confidentiality requirements are really quite explicitly outlined. How do you find that?
Yeah. So this is something that I think needs to be further established actually within any organization actually that wants to run or conduct research in-house. And I recommend that organizations do that instead of, giving this type of work over to consultants, but actually making sure that there are those systems and structures in place to protect both the researcher and people who are involved in that work. So some public sector organisations now do have ethics committees, and that's fantastic to see. I've actually been a member of one of them, and it's a really robust process, and it's very similar to a university ethics committee in the way that it's run with internal and external members and very strict guidelines, feedback processes, and I think that's really important. Something to be aware of though is that, yes, you're right, because your bills are being paid by the same organisation that you're researching. What if the findings are not something that the organisation wants to hear? So that's something to really consider, I think, as a researcher going outside of the university is, and another researcher within public sector has said to me once, you have to be careful that we maintain being researchers and don't become marketing and communications experts. Because, while it's important to reflect your organisation well, it's also really important to have that research integrity. And your findings, they might not be, they might be seen as a little bit scary for some people, but you have to be, I was listening to a Radio New Zealand interview this morning, which was about the public sector use of consultants. And they were saying the thing is, that as public servants, we should be kind of fearless because our whole objective and our kind of contract is to serve the people of our country. And sometimes that does mean asking the hard questions or presenting something that others might not like to hear. So I would just say that there's just it's very important to maintain those research ethics. But there are certainly challenges when you are doing that in-house, rather than being quite objective and kind of protected by the university to go in and go out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the pressure to soften the way that you're wording the results might also depend on whether it's just sort of an internal report or whether that's going to be made available sort of external to the organisation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have something called the Official Information Act. So if someone was to request some information from within the public sector, even if it hadn't been released externally, that information could still be actually accessed, which is fair enough because, again, this information is paid for by taxpayers. But yes, I think that that's something. And the other thing is that within the public sector, I think a major difference is, when you do work within public sector, it's attributed to the organisation. Whereas when you do work within academia, it's actually attributed to you. So there's those strict kind of, guidelines about authorship and intellectual property. And so you can really own your work. And with that, it's really up to the individual what they want to kind of put out there and what they can defend. Whereas within the public sector, it's often, I've found that often work can be quite anonymised or allocated to a team or a group or the organisation as a whole, which then, it can just create a little bit of a tension between the researcher and the organisation, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's always that that sort of overarching need to write with the voice of the organisation that you're representing, and I guess depending on who your minister is and what their particular policy positions are and all of that, that would sort of also have some level of influence over how far you're able to go, I guess, in terms of how, especially if you're critiquing something.
And I guess that really depends on the style of leadership that is within, nationally, but also within organisations too, because, I used to teach leadership in the workplace, and there's this notion of authentic leadership. And actually, followers tend to respond really well to leaders who are quite authentic. So that means, sometimes accepting if you are wrong, or if an apology is required, or if something that was all, had the best intentions but didn't quite land as it was supposed to, and just to acknowledge that and then make amends. And then within some organisations, there is a kind of leadership that can be more hierarchical and status quo, and it can be about maintaining an air of kind of, we're doing everything right, and a bit defensiveness. So it probably also very much depends on the leadership, and that could be, like you say, at societal level, at an organisational level, or even at a team level. Yeah, because I've noticed that in some of my research that it can be so different based on the team that you're actually talking to. You could sometimes think that you were talking to people from a completely different organisation. Yeah, so it's really personal as well, but it's definitely one of the challenges, I think. I think that authentic leadership is something that people want to see more of in general. Yeah, not always have it right, but just have the intention and the honesty and integrity to know when we can do better.
Well, Jason is certainly an authentic leader.
Yeah. What you see is what you get, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And you're quite happy to cop to it when you've made a mistake as well.
Yeah. Luckily that never happens. So
never.
Yeah.
No.
Kate, I think you've outlined a lot of the challenges about being an in-house researcher within the public sector quite well. What are the benefits then, right? So we've talked about some of those challenges. Why would, a public sector organisation like the one you work for want to have in-house researchers rather than, like you say, consultants or engage with academics in research institutions?
Yeah, I was recently on a panel for WorkSafe, and it was about innovation, and I suggested, bring more researchers into public sector in-house, because there are benefits, and some of the benefits are, for example, understanding the real intricacies of an organisation. So, there's this notion of insider, outsider in research, and there's benefits to both kind of positions. But when you're in an organisation, you are actually quite aware of some of the, like the culture and the climate for health and well-being, and how those things can actually be experienced across the organisation, or what some of the maybe some of the embedded practices or some of the cultural norms that might come across that if you came in from the outside you might not be completely aware of. So I think insider knowledge is really key, as is kind of holding accountability. And I think that that's something that's very powerful when you're in an organisation and you've talked to a lot of people and you start to understand some of the health and well-being, benefits and concerns. Then you're in the organisation to actually talk to those people who are the decision makers. That's really important, because otherwise sometimes you could conduct research within an organisation, but the buck could stop with a certain leader or a certain employee who might then leave the organisation. It's all kind of lost. So it's really cool to be able to be in an organisation, to be able to present findings to executive leadership teams, to present online, to reach out to a wide audience, to put things in board reports, to actually have that real vocal kind of, this is what the evidence is saying. And when I say evidence, I mean evidence from our people. because that's another thing I hear a lot about is evidence-based, but evidence-based, it is actually what our people say in the health and wellbeing space. That is our evidence.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode. Yeah, and Kate, I just want to pick up on that because that's so important. I'm sick of people like saying, oh, it's evidence-based because we've taken it from this one context where, research proved that it worked, or this is what they found in this context, and we're just going to apply it to our completely different context, and because it's evidence-based, it's applicable. No, like you say, for it to be truly evidence-based, you need to reflect on how does this actually fit within our context, and the way to do that is to talk to your people.
Yeah, absolutely. People forget that the evidence is our people's subjective experiences of their employment. That is the evidence. Like we can't go and say, well, we've got evidence for X, Y, and Z. Oh, but no one in our organisation can, support that, but that's the evidence. It's like, no, the evidence is what our people actually say. They're doing the mahi, they're doing the work.
We Joelle and I picked up someone, this is a while ago, Joelle, who was saying that their mindfulness program increased grey matter in the brain by a certain percentage. And I was like, oh yeah, what research did you do? Oh no, this research paper on mindfulness-based practice, did this fMRI type study and they found that. I'm like, well, okay, how does that apply to your program?
Yeah.
And I think that links into your prior question about some of the benefits of working within public sector. You work with a lot of people who have been there for a long time. There's a lot of experience within public sector. So you're working with people who often have quite an in-depth lived experience and knowledge of the work, of the kind of meaningfulness of the work, of the objectives, of the timeline from, some of the milestones the organisation has already been through, the overarching aims and objectives of the organisation. And there are a lot of really knowledgeable people within public sector. And I think that it's fantastic to be able to work with some of those people. And also, employee-led networks are a really big thing over here. And so a lot of public sector organisations have employee-led networks who would be advocating for various interest groups, whether that be the rainbow community or neurodiversity or women's network, Pacifica network, Māori networks. And I think being in the public sector gives you access to these fantastic collaborative groups of people who have a combined kind of long-term knowledge and experience base within that context and setting that you can draw upon. I met Joelle actually through a community of practice as well that I was part of establishing with the government health and safety lead, and we bring together multiple agencies from across the public sector in Aotearoa and share a lot of information. So there's actually a lot of collaborativeness, and there's I'd have to say that I'm really humbled often by the sense from people in health and wellbeing roles that have a real drive and a real passion for improving the well-being of our people. It's not everyone, but there's a lot of passionate and very dedicated people out there, which gives me a lot of energy and makes me want to, be part of this for a bit longer.
Yeah, no, Joelle and I both had exposure to the government health and safety lead over there, and, they are doing a fantastic job, like you say, creating that community and elevating best practice.
absolutely.
So we've started to talk about this idea of evidence-based practice or evidence-based work. So we're interested, I guess, in your experience. Would you say that the usual approaches to health and wellbeing in organisations are genuinely evidence-based?
Good question.
Bit of a leading question, maybe.
Look, I would say that evidence-based is this phrase which is thrown around, and unfortunately, I think the problem is a lot of people don't really know what it means and what does evidence-based mean, because like I said before, the evidence could be talking to your people and actually asking them, hey, what are your health and wellbeing concerns, or what are your experiences of the safety climate within this organization, or do we have a healthy culture? They're just broad open questions, but those are the actual types of questions where you can gain the evidence base to formulate strategy or to formulate initiatives that have real impact. And something that's really important to note is that within the health and wellbeing research literature, participatory approaches, so that's approaches that genuinely engage with the people who are intended benefactors of initiatives or of changes, those people need to co-design, co-develop, co-deliver, co-evaluate the initiatives that you seek to employ within organizations. And so I think that sometimes that's a little bit lost. So there's still, I would say, still a tendency for there to be kind of a lot of decision making without input from people on the ground. So that would be where I would say we could bridge a gap between evidence-based and not evidence-based, which is where I think we should bring in more people that actually have research backgrounds and can provide the evidence and can also have access to things like library databases so that we can actually read the most recent literature and attend conferences and all of these things that you would expect someone who might be able to then speak to the evidence to do. Because that's another thing is, you can take an academic out of academia, but you still have to make sure that that person's part of an academic community, because otherwise that distance between the evidence or the research and best practice, evidence-based, becomes greater over time as the person might become then, another cog in the system whereby towing the party line rather than asking those harder questions.
Yeah, and the access to the databases is a big one as well, right? And I mean, that's a whole separate podcast that probably doesn't belong to us around the practices of journal publishers and whatnot, and the charging arrangements.
I'll have to. You've just reminded me of a clip I need to show you from Twitter. This guy that I follow, he's hilarious.
I feel like I was quite fortunate because with my graduation, I actually got lifelong alumni access to the databases, which is awesome. And I use them all the time, and it's really important. So yeah.
Do you get full access? Because all of mine are like limited access. Maybe because you did a PhD, you get the extra.
I think I get full access. Yeah, from what.
Yeah.
But like, just before we move on, just think with the evidence base. I think the important thing as well is that if we are to truly be evidence-based in our practices and our approaches to health and wellbeing at work, we need to think that that needs to be embedded throughout the system of our work environment. So that needs to be across the board. So we have to have evidence-based, inductions, evidence-based training, evidence-based policies and procedures. And all of these things should tie into an evidence-based framework or strategy. And I think sometimes it's just that we do evidence-based for one part, but forget the others. And you don't have to do it all at once. There might be people listening who work in organisations and are really keen to improve health and wellbeing and want to do that through an evidence base. And it could be starting with looking at, what's the best way to communicate with your employees about health and wellbeing at work, or what's the best way to build a climate where people feel comfortable to share health and wellbeing concerns, or people can thrive. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, the whole psych health and safety approach is evidence-based in that you're going through cycles of consultation with the workers, going what's working, what's not, what do we need to improve, measuring, and then improving. For those listeners that are interested in delving deeper into evidence-based practice, we did a terrific podcast with Rob Briner out of Birkbeck University, who's a real proponent for evidence-based practice. And yeah, it's like you're saying, Kate, is really not just about reading some journal articles and going, this is what the evidence says we should do. It's about then testing it within your context and then evaluating whether it's working and tweaking as required.
Yeah. And in my experience, people know how to do that. So in my research, I say, what do you want us to do? How should we evaluate that? When should we evaluate that? You co-develop that all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's a difference in, I guess, between evidence-based process, which is, I think, what we're talking about here, almost from like an organisation development perspective. If we're looking at it sort of from a whole of organisation perspective, versus purchasing an intervention that's marketed as being evidence-based, and that's a very different thing.
Yeah, I've even been surprised sometimes as a researcher to see, for example, people who might deliver initiatives within organisations that conduct their own evaluation on their own success and efficacy, which then leads into their own evidence base about their service. And, there's a slight issue with that. And that's why I do think it's good to have researchers in-house who can sometimes ask those hard and uncomfortable questions like, how are you evaluating your service? And how about we evaluate the service? Because we're actually the purchaser or the buyer, we're the customer here. And then our people are the benefactors. So why don't we evaluate that service or that offering and then build our own evidence base based on our people? And exactly what you were saying, Jason, contextualizing that. Yeah, because I think sometimes we hand over a little bit too much of the evidence-based practice to those who have maybe even a commercial interest in the findings. And yeah, we need to make sure that we are really serving our people.
Yeah, which reminds me, there's someone who's got a fantastic example of that, doing a peer mental health advocate program in rail in the UK, who has done amazing evaluation. So yes.
Get them on?
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
Is there any other follow-up questions you had, Joelle?
Yes. What would you say are some, so I guess this approach of translating evidence, maybe even academic evidence, into practice, what do you find are enablers and or barriers to that process?
It's definitely about resourcing and senior leadership support. So ultimately, organisations are kind of like microcosms in and of themselves, and teams need to be, like health and wellbeing experts or teams or advisors need to be really enabled to enact some of the changes that they know are needed. And sometimes that can be really complex because there's a lot of players within organisations and a lot of layers. So, for example, a lot of policies often sit with HR, or, a lot of budget might sit with senior leaders. So it's about somehow getting that buy-in to the levels of the organisation that genuinely have the power and the resource to make the changes needed to do that.
Yeah, and that's certainly consistent with what we've observed working with our clients as well, that you really do need that advocate at the very top of the organisation for whatever it is that you're trying to do. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the resources, whether that's money, time, people, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I would say it's at the top, you're right, but In large organizations like public sector, with very large organizations, it has to be all the way through, because the larger, the more layers, So yeah, having worked within small to medium sized businesses, it's normally that the business owner. But within larger organizations, it can, often the line manager has the biggest influence on someone's health and well-being, but then it might be, there might be 2 or 3 layers above them before CEO and board. And sometimes those are the layers that hold most of the decision making. And those are the layers that I think that we need to make sure that those layers are trained in health and well-being approaches and understand the importance of not reinventing the wheel, or not just doing what we've always done, but making some changes where needed. And even if it means a bit more work or a bit of discomfort, that those layers need to be on board with that. And I guess something that I've seen is that sometimes those middle layers can be people who've been in the organisation for a very long time. And I'm not entirely sure, why that is, whether it's a part of that kind of climbing the ranks over time, or because public sector has generally very good working conditions, so good pay, good security, insurances, so people don't necessarily want to leave. But sometimes that can mean people have been in the organisation for a very long time and might not necessarily have the zest for change that you might see from someone who is maybe coming in with fresh eyes, or coming in from a slightly different perspective, or has just, completed their degree or their postgrad and has a real passion for this topic. So, yeah, I think it's also about thinking, how do we make sure that leaders in all layers of an organisation are on the journey towards understanding contemporary health and well-being? Yeah, and thinking about things like psychosocial health and well-being, mental health, things like trauma over time, things like how we have, benefits for people to have mental health days, and that sickness doesn't mean, that you have to be at home with a tummy bug, or that, if you're working, you have to be in the office at 8 a.m. and visible until 5 p.m. So those are the types of things I would say we need to just continue working on and considering, which will naturally change over time, right?
Yeah, and I think that with some of those, very long-term sort of middle management roles, there's probably a lot of cynicism, where they have seen, it's whatever the latest fad is that's going to be introduced, and there's a whole lot of money and upheaval, and then everything just reverts back to the mean anyway. So I think it's when you look at it from that perspective, you can see that it's actually a reasonable response from that group of people to go, well, I know how this is going to go. It's going to take a lot of time and effort. A lot of people are going to get, I guess the productivity is going to be sapped out of my team to go and focus on whatever this latest thing is, and then it's all going to disappear in 12 months' time anyway. So I'm not going to agree to this. So I think, there's probably from the perspective of somebody who wants to be a change agent, I think having some empathy with where that group of people are coming from as well, and being able to speak to them from that perspective is really important. I did have one client refer to that sort of section of the organisation as the permafrost, which was amusing and a little bit mean, which is really my niche. But I think that a lot of the time people are where they're at because of experience, and especially for people who have been there for a really long time. There's probably a good reason why they're approaching it the way that they are.
Some learnt cynicism.
Yeah.
And do you know what I'd love to see is just some more transparency in that, and some more accountability. So, for example, why don't we, wouldn't it be great to kind of know where our leaders are at within organizations in terms of their knowledge or their training, but also in terms of like, something I'm really keen to advocate for is things like maybe we should publish like the, statistics on things like personal grievances or sick leave or, these things, because it is public money. And I do think that we need to sometimes have a little bit more accountability with thinking, so how are our systems working and where are they working? And it's not to place blame. It's just to be very transparent and very honest about where we're at as organizations and also as a society, because you can't often do that. You couldn't really ask smaller organizations or private organizations to do that. But public sector could lead the way in some of those transparent practices and thinking about, and 360-degree review processes and exit interviews. And it's like I say, all that evidence based all the way through. So not just in the middle and not just when it suits, but all the way through, so that we actually have a very solid, very robust process to ensure that we are leading the way in this space, because I think that we really do have the resource to do that. So there's no reason why we shouldn't.
Mm.
Well, Kate, it's been a fascinating discussion with you today. I think you've really advocated for why, larger companies and government agencies should be investing in internal researchers. So I guess one of the questions we like to ask of all of our guests at this point in the podcast is, if you look into the future, what would your hopes for the future of workplace mental health be?
A big one would be, I'm a massive advocate of a 4-day working week or, less working hours. I think that that's something that would just automatically improve people's health and well-being and provide people the time, because what I hear all the time is, I'm time poor. I don't have enough time for that. I feel stretched. I feel guilty. I'm not spending time with my children or family. I think that that would be a fantastic way to, across the board, support mental health and well-being. I think that increased transparency as well is a hope for the future, because I do believe that, when we can do things like say, will we actually have minimized, say, gender pay gap or ethnic pay gaps, those things do increase people's mental health across the board. When we have equity in our society and in our organizations. And another hope for the future, and I think it's going to be quite a natural progression, because people are much more willing to talk about things like mental health and well-being at work, would just be an ability for people to sometimes challenge the status quo and sometimes be able to think outside the box and experiment, and not always have to get everything perfect and everything right, and to pilot some new ways of doing things, and to do so kind of unapologetically and in a way that can be experimental and supportive of mental health, and that can reflect what our people would like to see, and just be human in and of ourselves as practitioners and champions in this area. That, we are all on a journey. We're often really passionate about what we do. So my hope for the future would just be that we can keep doing that.
Just that. Yeah, that sounds like a manifesto. We might have to, write a short 3,000 word summary of that future, that workplace mental health future.
Kate's future. Do you have any words of advice for listeners who are interested in working in the field of psychological health and safety?
I would just say, always engage with your people. Remember that they hold all the answers, and at all layers of the organisation, including leaders. Leaders are employees too. So like Joelle was saying before, having that compassion for all layers and all people and their different perspectives and engaging with them. Being bold, challenge what doesn't work, experiment, and no need to be perfect. So embody the type of, health and well-being that you want to see. So if you are advocating, this is something I'm really passionate about, if you are advocating for work-life balance or you're advocating for health and well-being, make sure you are practicing that. Don't be the person who talks to the employees about relaxing on the weekend and sends emails at 2:00 on a Sunday. Like, make sure that you actually legitimate and normalize those healthy ways of being, and call out anything that you see that you don't feel fits with a culture of health and well-being, because at the end of the day, it is a very serious topic, And, some people have massive repercussions from bad experiences, and some people can be supported in their workplace, which could turn them around from a very negative experience into a positive one. So we've got to think of the workplace as a high impact kind of space where we can improve health and well-being and support people to thrive in their broader lives.
Fantastic advice.
Okay, like I said before, it's been a fascinating discussion. I think our listeners will get a lot out of this. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Great. Well, our listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do video these when we have our conversations with our amazing guests, and you can catch those videos on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. You'll also find that we take short clips and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. And while you're over on LinkedIn checking those out, you'll find that Joelle and I frequent there quite a bit, probably too much. So feel free to DM us or connect with us if you'd like to continue the conversation on that medium. But that's it for today. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.